Thank you so much for that, Pao, and I want to thank you for coming to listen to this lecture. I hope it will be a good moment of learning and getting to discover new things and all the things that we have forgotten. You've been told my name is Saneta. I'm trying to fix myself here so everything goes on well. And we want to look a little bit about Africa. And some of us know more, some of us know less about Africa. Just to ask a question, how many countries do we have in Africa?
50.
Good trial. 50? 53. Good trial. Okay, how many languages do we have in Africa? 200? Keep on guessing. 300? 1 million? Okay. Those are some of the things we are going to discover. And also we are going to look at how has Africa been presented to the world through media. Good things and bad things. That's what I call perceptions and misperceptions. Now, I don't know whether you are able to see these statistics. How big is Africa? Africa, really the whole of United States can fit into Africa. The whole of China can fit into Africa. And the whole of Europe can fit into Africa. And there are other areas that are not covered. So we can say maybe Canada can come in. That's how big Africa is. And we are looking at the total numbers, approximate area square miles of the whole continent. Many times I hear people say they're a country of Africa. And I say, no, that's not a country. It's a continent we are talking about. So we want to look at this information. We have 54 countries. Thank you for trying, those who said 53. And out of these 54 countries, some of them are disputed Western Sahara territories that are counted as countries. And also we have the coastal highlands that also are counted to make it 54 countries. And if you want to name all these countries, they are all here that make Africa. Now, what is Africa? If you start doing research and look, where did this name come from? Really, no one knows where the name Africa came from. So how can you define Africa? Maybe there's no way you can define Africa. But the anthropologist Colin Turnbull came up with a theory. And what did he call his theory? Whole continent concept, whereby he looks at the whole of Africa, from South Africa, North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and looked at it and said, Africa is one continent. Even as diverse as it is with languages and cultures and different tribes, Africa is one continent. But then this political scientist, Professor Al-Masrouri, came up with another theory, which he calls the Trans-Red Sea theory. It says Africa also includes Saudi Arabia. Because of what? The Arabic language in Saudi Arabia, the culture is almost the same. When you go Egypt, Algeria, North Africa, you go up to Nigeria, you come even Sudan, the climate is almost the same, the languages are the same, all these things. And they said, I don't know why the Europeans decided to say this is the boundary for Africa, because the colonialists are the ones who came and said this is the boundary for Africa. But in the real sense, this political scientist says, no, Africa goes beyond the boundaries that we see along the Red Sea, not East Africa. But then, look at Vincent Mulago. What does he say about vital union, or continent concept? He looks at the way people share their family connections, relatives, grandparents, great-grandparents. It's like Africa is one family. And maybe things like those people say, Africa is the cradle of humanity, the cradle of humankind. The human species started from Africa. Though you can keep doing research and find out really, does it mean that all of us came from Africa? And here we are talking about the evolutionists. movement, those who look at the origin of human beings. But for those who look at it from the creation point of view, it might not be the same argument. But the vital union theory of worldview looks at all people in Africa. And that extent you can say the whole world. And it looks at it as human beings came from one source. Which source is this? Probably it is not known, whether it's through evolution or whether it's through creation. Okay, those who want to find out what Africa really is could like to use some of these approaches. You know, when we talk about communicative competence, and also a theory that is developed by a linguist, anthropological linguist. Delhems says, if you have to understand a culture, you have also to understand the adult rules for socially and culturally what? Appropriate speech. So you can have a language that makes sense among all the people. So if we talk of Africa as a continent, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the geographical map or a cultural boundary, or what are we talking about? Or you can use this linguistic competence, whereby Naomi Chomsky says you have to master the language of the adults and their grammar that they use. If you want to talk about Africa, use this language that those old people use, because they have a vocabulary that young people don't have. And maybe through that you might be able to come up with a theory of what Africa is. Here we are trying to ask, what is this thing that we call Africa? It's a question that keeps going on, going on, going on. What about the linguistic relativity principle? We look at it and think about Sapir and the Wolf. They come up with this theory of saying language has power, and every time you use the language, you are kind of entering into a world of what? Understanding the people of that context. It's saying language shapes the way people look at the world. Language shapes the way people define the world. Now, because of these several perceptions that we can talk about, we look at Africa that has been created, but some of them, some of the theories that have come up are misguiding. Some of them have come up and Africa has been defined by foreigners. You think of the Arabs who came to Africa. Talk from the 7th century, the Arabs came to Africa. And maybe probably they are the ones who came up and said, this is Africa. The Europeans who came as colonialists, some of them are slave masters. And the Arabs together, when they came, they said, this is what we want to call Africa. And probably there was some reasons why they did set the boundaries to say this is Africa, because probably they never wanted Africa to be part of the global world in different ways, economics, politics, and name all those other things that you can talk about. Now, these are some of the perceptions that we see about Africa. You hear, even in the media, what do we hear all the time? Africa is a wrecked continent. Haven't we heard about that? Africa is a place where there's poverty. Africa is diseases. Africa is starvation. Africa is war. All these problems. So even when you ask people, what is Africa? They will say Africa is problems. So like it's equivalent. There are some other perceptions or misperceptions that say Africa is a great continent. What is good in Africa? It's a continent that has not been corrupted. Corrupted by what? By Western influence or Western, what they call civilization in quotes. But in the real sense, there are people who look at it from the African perspective. They say this is not civilization. And at that we can debate and talk about the Europeans who came to Africa. After the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, what happened when they came to Africa? And when the Africans started fighting for freedom, to gain independence in their countries, they were using spears and the shells and the stones, and these civilized people were using guns. If you are civilized, how can you use a gun against someone who has a spear? Okay, Africa as foreign. Africa is a continent that really doesn't fit into the global picture. People say it's foreign because people are naked. People don't have clothes. So when people travel from Africa, they go to Germany, they go to Europe, they come to America, maybe they get their clothes at the airport, or maybe they get their clothes where they are going. Is that true? Those are some of the things that people need to keep asking. Is this really what we call Africa? Or what is Africa like? What about ceremonies where people dance? If they dance naked and that's their culture, why should you complain? That's their culture and they love it. But there are people give a misperception of Africa. It's where people don't have that moral consciousness, which is not true, depending on what you call moral consciousness. Or there are people who say moral ignorance. They don't understand the morality of the culture. Okay, dressings, different clothes that they wear sometimes scare people, and people look at it and say, uh-oh, this is foreign, really. Africa's ancient. It's a dark continent. When the Europeans were coming to Africa, and let us talk of 1880s, 1890s, or 1900, when they came, how did they look at Africa? Africa was the dark continent. Where did they get this term, dark continent? What made Africa dark? I don't know where they got that concept. But you need to ask yourself when you say, this is a dark continent. Probably it's like someone who is coming from California looks at Fort Wayne and says, Fort Wayne is a dark city. Simply because of what? You compare California, you compare Fort Wayne, Indiana, Midwest. You know, what makes someone to say you are less who you are using my own standard, ethnocentric kind of perspective? Look at other cultures, look at other people and say you are less than what the world expects. Don't we see it every day where we are? Asian tribes, Stone Age, oral people, they don't have even their language. They have not even written down their language. The question is, does language become scholarly simply because of being written? Does it mean we cannot have a scholarly language by being oral? Those are some of the things we keep asking, the perceptions and misperceptions that we see. Africa's treacherous, Africa's world, and then you can talk about the media says Africa is a jungle, Africa is a desert, Africa is not safe. When you see one problem in one part of Africa, it is portrayed. If you are traveling to Africa, you are told, don't go, there are killings everywhere. And maybe that's one region at one of the corners in Africa. So you are told, don't go there, there's war. I was talking with the students and I said, if you are traveling, let me give you an example. You are traveling from Indiana. If you come from Indiana, you are going to where? You are going to Africa, one of the countries in Africa. What are you told before you travel from here? You get all the immunizations, isn't it? Get all these treatments. Why do you get them? Come on, come on, come on. Why do you get all these immunizations and treatments before you travel? Tropical diseases. So kind of you are protecting yourself against the diseases that you are going to encounter. What about the diseases that you have that you might take to those people? Who protects them where you go? What about those who are coming to the United States? Why do they receive immunizations in their countries? Because they are coming to this country and the country says, these are the requirements. We don't want you to come and bring what? Diseases. But who protects them? The same thing, vice versa. Keep asking yourself about those questions. When the media says, this is what is outside there, is that always true? Yes, sir.
Have the governments in the different African countries thought of asking visitors to be inoculated against diseases that would be of concern?
That would be a good way of doing it. But if you are colonized, if I have colonized you and I've controlled you, you know, even now there's that, we call it neocolonialism, that is done by the local leaders, but also there are those colonial governments that are still in control of Africa. So if you ask them, we want you to meet this requirement before you come to this country, And you are receiving what? Money, support, and other things. You can't ask them to do that. Anyway, we'll continue. But thank you for asking that. The government has to be intentional in saying, this is what we are expecting. But do they have the power to do that? Probably they don't have the power to do that. And you'll keep seeing the impact of slavery, the impact of colonialism that has affected what we see in Africa to this day. Africa's intact, and you can talk about, you can keep thinking about that. Africa, history and anthropology. Now, you ask yourself, are they part of the world academic dream? And not only these two subjects, maybe if you are in philosophy, when you talk about African philosophy, how much is that known if it is going to be an academic field? They're all global, if you look at it global. Is it a subject for Africa only, or is it supposed to be a subject for the whole world? You can ask in every subject, even psychology. You know, we look at it from the Western approach of psychology. Then you say, anything that has developed from the African perspective, do we have anything like that? Now, my friend Thornton examined during the 19th century. What did he examine? He looked at the documents that had been written, by explorers and missionaries. When the missionaries came to Africa, you know, they followed the gun. The Bible followed the gun. It's not that the gun followed the Bible. I hope I'm making sense here. Now, when the Europeans came, they were getting all these regions of Africa and saying, Britain, take this, German, take this, France, this is your area, Spain, this is your area. Just have all these portions of Africa. And then the explorers started coming in. And the early missionaries who came were people like Dr. David Livingstone. When David Livingstone came to Africa, why did he come to Africa really? He came as a great missionary. He was a medical doctor, but he felt he wanted to spread the gospel. So he came, and he came to fight against slavery. Slavery that had been there from the 1440s. You are talking of 15th century, 16th century, 17th century. And now, we are talking of 19th century. This Dr. David Livingstone comes and says, we need to fight against slavery. When slavery had been considered illegal in the United States by that time, even the whole Europe. We are talking of 1807, when William Wilberforce, you know, the fighting of William Wilberforce, and come to 1837 when it was completely illegal, and then 1865 in the United States. And now we are talking of 1900. We are talking of 1880s. David Livingstone is coming and saying, we don't want slavery to continue. What do we want? We want to start what we call 3 C's: Christianity, civilization, and commerce. Those are 3 things that Livingstone came up with. And he said, we want to spread Christianity so that we can help these people who are uncivilized, so that they can stop their religions. You know, Africans had their own religion by that time. The same thing happened with the Arabs who came. Arabs came and assumed that there is no culture, there is no religion. Africans had their own religions. They had what we call African traditional religion. They had their ways of experiencing their higher power. But they were told there is this thing that is foreign, that is good. Christianity and Islam, they came to Africa. And then he's looking at the translations that were done. How were they done? You come, you speak this language, and you learn the language of the people, then you write something about those people, because someone else needed it. Really, it's not the Africans who needed these documents, written documents. The Europeans who wanted to get to understand Africa, the ones who needed documents that were written, and those who were interested. Then they discovered the role that was played by what? Theological researchers. And then in doing what? In classifying African languages and peoples. So even when we talk about the Kushites, the Bantus, the Nilotes in Africa. These are classes of different languages. Really, that was a European social construct that was established for their own gain. It was not established by Africans so that they classify all these languages. They are different tribes. Now here we look at African colonial boundaries. When the colonialists came, they set boundaries. They said, the Britons have to take this area. I hope you are able to see. You are not able to see, I'm sorry, I'm not, that's not. But they had to set boundaries in different regions. But again, remember what was happening when they divided Africa. When all these different nations met in Berlin in this period of November 1884 to February 1885, they discussed and said, which area are you going to take? And why did they need to take control of Africa? It was raw materials. They needed raw materials. Of course, the Industrial Revolution had come. Slavery was being destroyed. So when slavery was destroyed in Africa, it was kind of baptized into a new name of colonialism. So it was from one problem to another problem. Now, you look at, especially Britain, if you want to look at Britain, going from Kenya, Uganda, going north up to Egypt, and then it goes to Nigeria, it goes to Gold Coast. Getting some good stuff, getting gold and other minerals and raw materials. And there was reasons why they ended up doing that. Then African languages become scholarly through writing. This is how every time you wonder, these people used to speak. They knew how to speak. And probably they couldn't be able to write the language they were able to speak. So it became scholarly because social science was becoming significant, not for the Africans that time, but for what they call civilization in quote, so it could be used around the world. Why should African languages become scholarly? Simply because they are in the written form and not oral. I throw this question so we keep thinking about it. Why should it be like that? As a colonial social construct, was this way a way of controlling African scholarship, you think? You think, was it going to be possible to have scholarship through oral communication? 1863. This guy, Richard Speake, develops a hypothesis. And he calls it Hamitic hypothesis. This is what it argued. Said light-skinned Hamitic people are intruders, and who are these, you think? And I want you to go back to Al-Mazrui. Professor Al-Mazrui, what did he say about about Africa, North Africa and Saudi Arabia? They are kind of the same. But when the Europeans said, no, Africa ends here, there are those from Saudi Arabia, the Arabs who had come to Africa. They were light-skinned, so they were foreigners. Anything foreign is not from Africa, so anything foreign is civilized. The Europeans who had come, they were civilized because they were light-skinned. So this theory was developed, and as it was developed, they went to an extent of saying that Speake went ahead to say the origin of these, especially you go to Ethiopia where they talk of Christianity in Ethiopia. You go back to the time of 12 children of Israel. And then what does that mean? The 12 children of Israel came to Ethiopia. They were light-skinned. They were foreigners. So any civilization that you could be able to see in Africa during all this time was foreign. There was no civilization before that. Both supported their Hamitic hypothesis. The African elites, African scholars, and those foreigners who were there, they came together and they agreed, okay, this is great. It's a good theory, and we better accept it because we are getting benefits. The hypothesis, though, lacked the factual evidence to say that you have to be light-skinned. When you are light-skinned, then you are you are superior or you are civilized. It was kind of, no, there was no empirical evidence to show that. And then it was used as a tool for European what? Dominancy. For that matter, treating Africans as uncivilized and barbaric. Now, this myth of looking at the light-skinned people, the Abashiresi, for example, of Central Africa, R. Johnson went ahead to do research to find out really, is it true? Where did these Abashiresi come from? Where did they come from? And they went ahead to find out that they came from Ethiopia, from northern part of Africa, and argued that they were foreign. They were not there. How was the Hermetic hypothesis used to classify these people? Look at what has happened in Rwanda, for example, most recently. And you wonder, in Rwanda, what are we talking about? We are talking of people of the same kind of blood. We are talking of the Tutsis, we are talking of the Hutus. They are almost the same people. But because of something like this, the hypothesis that was developed, okay, it says the Hutus are always viewed as foreigners simply because of the theory that said the Tutsi minority in Rwanda, they are from the Hamitic nobility, and for that matter, they possess what? Higher intellectual superiority. So kind of something foreign, developed by Harry Johnson, who is a foreigner. Now they take it, they say, oh, so you people are different. So you people, you are superior than us. This tribe is superior than us. Without empirical evidence of really, is this true? Is this what is happening? Remember the negative colonial implications of these kind of classifications. Even today, when we talk of the Bantus, we are talking about the Nilotes, when we are talking about the Kushites, this classification that was not there. There were names for the tribes, and those names of tribes were kind of put aside. So they were grouped together, kind of the way you talk like that guy, so you need to be related to this person. Maybe there's something. If you come from Indiana, maybe people in Indiana, they talk like people from Ohio. This is just guessing. Maybe. And those who come from Texas, maybe they have their own southern accent. They might be classified with the people from where? Florida? I don't know. So, something like that. The colonialists used this theory to really find out who are who that we need to identify within Africa. And how are we going to benefit from this? The data that was collected, you ask yourself, how did they collect the data? And what language did they use? Who was analyzing this data? Are they foreigners or the local people? Did they have the tools even to analyze the data? The data was maybe corrected, and it was taken to where? To London and other places around the world. They analyzed it there. And then documents are sent to the whole world saying this is what Africa is. And maybe no Africa was involved. The Africa was only involved when he or she was asked a question to say yes or no. Eric Wolf's book that was written in 1982 says Europe and the People Without History. And what Wolf talks about is that Africans, there's a time they didn't have history. So they started having history when it was written into documents that people could be able to read. So the inspiration of this was that the Europeans had to come to Africa and learn more about history, about anthropology, and do research and write documents. And even today, as scholars, as you read books and literature, check and find out who are the writers of these books. How much do they work with the local African people, scholars, to produce something? You know, it's good. If I write history of Fort Wayne, I would definitely get someone from Fort Wayne to give me the information because I don't know that history. How much do I get from the people so that I can prove that it's not only me, but there's also another person from these people who has produced, or helped me to produce these historyless people of Africa. Now, the Europeans' objective was to change all history into written history, and for that reason, give it what? Scientific approach. That, of course, they said became scholarly. Some of the theoretical methodological issues taken into consideration when constructing Africa's past. We need to ask ourselves, what are some of those considerations, especially theoretical considerations that are looked upon as we construct the African past? What are some of the methodological issues on doing research related to African history or African anthropology, and you can name other things? The past was corrupted by slavery. And if you want to understand a little bit about this slavery, you need to go to the Portuguese. When the Portuguese were coming to West Africa, what was bringing them to West Africa? It was gold. They wanted gold. And after exploiting, getting all the gold from West Africa, what happened? Later on, they discovered there's a new business of getting human beings. And millions of people were sold. And as they were sold, now they reached a point where they said, the new world is now satisfied with human labor, but we want to change this. Why don't you work in plantations where you are so that we can have raw materials? Or you have all these minerals in Africa. Why don't we start getting other minerals from here so we can use them? The Europeans who came, they said slavery is sin, but the exploitation of raw materials was not sin. I don't know why they came up with that kind of a theory. But some of the tools that the ethnographers and archaeologists and historians use in predicting Africa's past, we need to ask, what are these tools that they use? How do these tools help in changing the misperception which says Africa exists outside history? We can say, is there a possibility of rejecting strict essentialist and constructionist views of history? I throw these questions. You as scholars, as people who are maybe doing research on Africa, is there something you can change in the way you approach, the way you correct your data? Is there a way you can do it different simply because of some of the information you are receiving? And I think that's why I felt I should make this kind of presentation. Think of Anstall's book. When Anstall writes Making History in Bound Anthropological Visions of Africa's Past, she argues clearly that the present shapes the past as much as the lived past. So if the present is the one that shapes the past, then we are talking about the lived past. What kind of lived past is that? The people who live there, the people who live in that community, the people who know what it feels like, why they look at things the way they do. We need to gather, we need to get data from those people who can tell stories in their language. And then you have to master the language. You can't just travel and 1 month, 2 months, you correct data and produce research and say, I've done it. You have to live with the people, you have to smell, you have to eat with them. And then you have to understand the dialects, the meanings of the language that is used. So when you produce something, it comes out as something, you become like an authority. You know, that's what I'm an authority because I can speak that language and my understanding. And probably you are not going to get 100%, even as much as you live with those people. There are things you will not understand. Archival researchers by foreigners in African anthropology and history become a reproduction of a colonized misperception of Africa. The few people are able to go and say, I know the mess that has been there through the media, but I don't want to produce something messed up like the colonialists. I want to produce something different. Is someone who will be willing to go and live there and work with those people and understand them and not say, you know, I have all these degrees, I know what it means to be in Africa. You go, you say, you know, I have all these degrees, but I don't know anything about Africa. Tell me about it. And then you become a good student. And then you get the data. And then you produce it. Of course, you have that evidence that I worked with the people themselves. Historians, anthropologists, as they gather data, are they able to take time as they analyze their data to be able to say, I want to produce something that could be used not only in America, but it can also be used in Africa. And no one will say, no, this is not for us. Unfortunately, we have even African scholars who are writing literature and doing research for their own people. They don't want to produce documents that could be used in the whole world. That's not even good either. We have to produce something that will look at things from a global perspective, and something that could be used in Africa, and it could be used even in America. You produce something in America, if you want something to serve in anthropology, history, produce something at least that will go and make sense also in other parts of the world. These are your questions. Informing our history and vice versa before it becomes a written scholarly document, the presentation of Africa's past, colonized, and also looking at post-colonial theory. We talk about post-colonial theory. We also talk about a revisionist theory. We talk about something that is revising what we have in literature. You talk of most African countries started becoming independent in the 1950s. Of course, you talk of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, 1957. And then you talk of other countries that later on came to 1960s. And then 1970s, these researchers came up writing some things about Africa. Now it's a time that we need all these scholarly documents to be revised to give a different perspective of African history, African anthropology. Unfortunately, even today you'll be surprised, even medical researchers, scientists who go there, especially when they are looking for new medicine for HIV, AIDS, and other things. And you wonder how much colonialism is involved in that, how they use the people as objects in order to get what they need. Is that the best way? How can they go there maybe and sit with the other medical scholars or from those countries and say, we want to find out how best we can produce something that will help your people and will help our people in the West, if I call it that way. This myth that the European shows clear the misinterpretation and misconception of African past where colonial scholars drew from. Even so, due to socio-political pressures of decolonization, now we are talking of a period of nationalism. Now these countries are fighting and saying we can't continue living under the colonial oppression. We want to fight for our freedom. And as they were fighting, some of them ended up doing what? Borrowing the colonial mindset. And to this day, those who were scholars during those days are producing another mindset that we see all the time in the colonial literature. You know, I don't know whether I give you a time to ask a question. If you can be patient until I'm done so that you can ask questions at almost the end, please give me time so I can finish what I'm doing here. So we go to Evans Pritchard, an anthropologist who did what? He went and did some research about the Luo tribe back in Kenya and sat down and said, how can we engage the people, the politics of the people, and then look at the history. Where have these people come from? How did they migrate from their original land to come to where they are? What has shaped them through this process? And then Okot Pitek, a Ugandan, but someone who was trained in Britain, came back and said, I think I need to develop a new theory. And what did he do? European theory, such as Semitic theory, he argued against it because he said this is another form of colonialism. He said, we need to understand the language of the people. We need to live with the people. We need to find a way. When we write it not only in the way that our people understand it. The problem that he had was that he was saying even literature has to be written in their own languages. That means it is going to be limited. Whatever research findings is going to be used within that tribe or in Africa. This is not going to be global. Of course, he was trained in Britain, so we don't know how much that changed his perceptions. But also, you look at also a linguistic anthropologist he argued in favor of what? Mastering the vernacular language of the people. As an anthropologist, you understand the language of the people and write something that shows really you understand how these people process the information that they have. Now, you can keep talking. I think I said this. Africa comprises of more than 800 ethnicities, and we are talking of more than 1,000 languages. And from there, then you look at how the Europeans categorized or classified different groups of languages. For example, if you look at Niger-Congo family of languages, you say the Igbo. Igbo is in Nigeria. Swahili is in East Africa. And then you talk of the Yoruba, it's in Nigeria. Zulu is where? It's in South Africa. How are these all related? They don't come from the same region, but it was arranged that way. Is it because of dialect? Anthropologists who are linguistics maybe might help me here because I'm not, I don't know. But it's something we need to ask ourselves, how did they put this together? How did they really come to a point of saying there's Afro-Asiatic family of languages? And then they put Arabic, Aramaic, they put Hausa, which is in northern Nigeria. And then they say Hebrew, and they will also include Tigrinya, Ethiopia. Friends, we need to keep asking, how much of true information do we have about Africa history or African anthropology? And you are the people who can change these. You are the people who can start looking at things in a different way and maybe produce something different and say, we want to look at Africa from a different perspective without a colonized kind of approach. Many people, dialects and regional languages in Africa. Of course, the population of Africa is approximately, we are talking of 941 million people. And we are talking about the census for as per February of 2007. So by now, maybe, don't think whether it has gone to 942. African history and anthropology be written in these languages? And what languages is it going to be written? If you talk of all these thousands of languages, is it going to be written in these languages? Probably no, it is not going to be possible. So is there a unifying language that is going to be used? Probably no, there's no unified language. That's how diverse and how problematic Africa is. Is there anything that we can come up with? If you talk of Swahili, it's going to serve one region of Africa. If you talk of Arabic, it's going to serve northern Africa. If you talk of Hausa, you are thinking of northern Nigeria. And then think of the other novelists who have come up. Maybe you have heard about Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o argues clearly that we need even to write our poems, our novels in our native languages because it has power. It communicates something. You think of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, the book that was produced in the 1950s, and even today it has impact because it was written in a way of fighting for freedom and condemning all the foreign intruders. And even today, nothing has been produced like that. All these other scholars, you don't have to know more about them, but just to hear about them and just to find from Cameroon, all these who have written. All these are books that have been written in a way to fight back against foreign domination and suppression and oppression. Think of read Fodoma, and then you talk about the beautiful ones are not yet born. You know, you read it more, he talks about still Africa has a long way to go. These problems that we are seeing, we are still seeing the reproduction of the colonial, of the slavery experiences. Is there a time when this is going to change? And who is going to change this? Now, I'm just, when you start seeing it doing like this, it means I'm almost done. That's a good signal of saying I'm almost done. African historiography was based on European sources, archives, and work of missionaries. You'll be surprised even today If you want to find some of the original documents that were done by the Europeans, their discoveries, you'll not get them in Africa. Where did they go? As the Europeans were moving out of Africa, they were carrying everything and they were taking them to where? Their European universities. So you have to go there and learn it from there and go back and write it for them. It's an unfortunate situation. Then you talk about Roland Orwell writes the history and gives examples about Africa. Then you talk about Vansina's oral tradition, who argues strong about all traditions, and talk about all this. But one of the work that has been done, the work that has been done by David Cohen and Athieno Odhiambo, an American, a Kenyan, they do research, they look for data, and there's someone who is saying, no, that's not how it is in this culture. There's someone who is kind of criticizing your work. And you are also saying this is not how it is supposed to be done when you talk of scientific standards or correcting data. So you get people working together to produce something that will cut across the globe. I like this because that's what I think could be done. Where is Africa when it comes to the scholarship of history and anthropology? Those are the questions I want you to go home with. Do scholars have the power to control their writings that are used and understood by others? African historians and anthropologists have, even to this day, they have done what? An obligation of focusing their scholarly authority to present a well-defined, authentic Africa and its strengths in language competence while utilizing shared research methodologies. And probably as scholars interested in African history or anthropology, there's need to develop a sense of shared what? Culture. How is that going to be? It's to be willing to apply what we call cultural relativism. If I respect you, I'll be willing to sit and learn from you. If I don't respect you, I don't want anything to do with you. Well-constructed historical accounts within the comparative. Lastly, remember, all history and anthropology is a powerful written tool. Thank you very much. So, how do you do? Any question, please? Never mind. Don't look at this. This is my angel. This is my daughter. When I was doing this, she did like this, and I said, I caught you. I put you there. Yes, sir.
I know your talk today is on Africa, but
yes,
much of what you say
yes,
apply to anywhere else in the world the Europeans went, including right here in the United States.
Thank
the
you.
Native American cultures were dismissed as ahistorical, and well, you know, South America's the same thing, Asia's
yes,
the same thing.
yes.
You're bringing an African accent to it. I appreciate that's good. You know, I'm not criticizing for that, but I'm saying that actually what you're talking about is European colonial interpretations.
Okay. Probably I can agree, but I was focusing on Africa, yeah, and I'm glad you can identify with it and say this is almost the same thing with other countries that we see. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Another question, please? Yes, ma'am.
Talk about how there are countries, 1,000 dialects, 800
yes,
ethnicities. In the last slide, you talked about the need for a shared culture.
Yes. And I'm not talking of Africa. I'm talking of global shared culture.
Okay. I was just going to say, how can you develop a shared culture with such a variety of culture?
I said any possibility. If you can help me find it, it will be great. But it would be good. I was saying, is there a possibility of doing this so we can help save the situation? That's why you are in school if you are going to school here. If you are not going to school, you better go back to school so we can find out maybe the best way we can do it. Thank you for checking about that. Another question? Yes?
In Africa, you're saying there wasn't a lot of historical texts that were written.
Yes.
That's pretty much the same way as I see over here before communities came here.
Sure.
Because nobody over here could write down what was going on. It was passed on orally. So wouldn't that really call in archaeologists in Africa where they could construct prehistoric
yes,
cultures through materials they were using in.
Excellent, but what did I say? We need them, but they have to work with the people. The problem is they come, they do their work, they go, they produce their findings. Did you get what I meant there? They have to come to Africa and do research and work with the African scholars who are there in the field, the same field, and produce something that makes meaning for those people and also for them. I think I have no problem with more archaeologists, anthropologists going to Africa and doing this, but the problem is when they come and say, oh, we are a superior culture, we are bringing hope, you are lost, we are the ones who know everything. That's what I was criticizing. Another question? Thank you so much, then I better we are done. Thank you.